Guys, welcome to another video. You've got Mr. Everything English, and today we are looking at something that we are never taught, but it's assumed that we all know from the very beginning. Having been a teacher, guys, for my adult life and having been a student before that, we are always taught or we are always teaching content. So whether it's English, whether it's maths, whether it's science, whatever subject, the focus is always content. But we're never actually taught, how do you study? How do you revise? What are the best strategies? And what do we all end up doing? I did the same thing, guys. We end up copying what we see. So if you look at the three most popular strategies, but the three least effective strategies, what are they? They are highlighting, they are rereading, and they are making notes. And that's exactly what I used to do. I would see other people making notes with lovely highlighters and lovely pens and colors and beautiful mind maps. And I thought, you know what, if I don't create a book of notes, then I'm not revising properly. I just copied what I saw. And that person I was copying probably copied what they saw. None of us were taught, none of us had thinking behind what we were doing. And this probably is the same for you. And then if we look at research-based, what are the most successful, proven methods of revising, of learning? Top of the list is active recall, is practicing. Now, we're gonna go over these in a lot of detail in this video. So hopefully, guys, by the end of this video, you'll have a clear idea on what to do for revision and what to avoid for revision. So let's begin.
Everything education. Tuition for maths, English and science.
The study, guys, that we're going to use for this video is a study conducted by psychologist Dalnosky in 2013, where he reviewed 10 revision strategies. And he came to certain findings which are quite interesting. The first thing, guys, that we want to focus on is the idea of rereading. Going over and rereading your notes is something that lots of people do up and down the country. They sit at home and they take out their book and they reread and they reread and they reread and they reread, thinking that that's benefiting them. But if you look at what Dalnosky found, guys, he said that based upon the available evidence, we rate rereading as having low utility. Although rereading is relatively economical with respect to time demands, when compared with some other learning techniques, rereading is also typically much less effective. Now, this strategy, guys, in essence, what Dalnosky found was that it was an easy strategy. Rereading doesn't take much effort and doesn't take much time. That's probably a reason why so many of us do it. Secondly, a lot of us do rereading because we believe that the more we read something, it's gonna go inside us. We're gonna digest it and we're gonna keep it inside us. What he found, guys, was that rereading was essentially a waste of time. It was a very passive task where a lot of students were reading, but they weren't even thinking about what they were reading. It's like reading words in Chinese or reading random words of a page. Your lips are moving, your eyes are moving, but there's nothing being digested up in the brain. And he also found that it was a very popular strategy. But in essence, he found that this strategy was not effective when it came to being a strategy for learning. So let's cross off rereading from the list. The next strategy, guys, that he focused on, and this is by far something we all have done. And you see every student, literally every student in the country has done this. And this is the strategy of highlighting. When revision begins, what's the first thing we do, guys? We order a packet of pastel colored highlighters. And we use these highlighters and we have blues and greens and yellows and pinks and purples and we highlight everything. We'll highlight the poems and we'll highlight the quotes and we'll highlight science stuff. We highlight everything. And we see that this will help me pick out key information. But this is what Dalnosky found in his research when it comes to highlighting. On the basis of available evidence, we rate highlighting and underlining as having low utility. In most situations, highlighting does little to boost performance. It may actually hurt, and this is very important when it comes to English. it may actually hurt performance on higher level tasks that require inference making. Guys, the two strategies so far, rereading and highlighting, if you look at in essence what they do, they're very robotic tasks. They're very robotic endeavors. When you highlight, you're simply going over language and words, but this is very important. It does nothing to help with inference. It does nothing to take your learning and your ability to a higher level. And that skill of inference is exactly what you need for English, which is the subject that I teach. So for those of us who spend ages and ages highlighting quotes and highlighting things that maybe we want our eyes to pick up, it is somewhat, based upon the data, a pointless task. Now, does this mean that the world will stop highlighting? No. My advice so far for both of the revision strategies, rereading and highlighting, you're probably not going to stop doing it, so do it. But do it at the start of your revision when you begin. You can't be 3-4 months into revision and still rereading, still highlighting. That's what I would say about these strategies. If these are things that you're doing every week, then you're doing them ineffectively. Wherever you want to read content-wise, read it at the beginning. Wherever you want to highlight it one time at the beginning. But don't constantly do these things thinking that you're benefiting yourself, because the data is the data. It proves that they are not effective learning strategies. Then guys, number 3, making notes. Making notes. Oof, this is a controversial one because man, everyone makes notes, even me. I love making notes. When I'm trying to learn, I love breaking things down. So this one's a bit of a controversial one, but it's an important thing to think about. Different students have different quality or have a different quality of notes. Some students have very thorough kind of notes. Is that a note, or have you just recopied whatever you just learned? Some people have very good kind of bullet point lists and they can kind of learn and stagger. But my point is that it's a very subjective topic because the quality of note making differs massively among students. But this is what Donlowski's research found. He said that on the basis of the available evidence, we rate summarization as low utility. It can be an effective learning strategy for learners who are already skilled at summarizing. However, many learners, including children, high school students, and even some undergraduates, will require extensive training, which makes this strategy less feasible. My 2 cents on this is the following. Your school isn't going to teach you how to make notes. Schools don't do that. No one's going to teach you. Most teachers don't even know how to make notes because no one's taught. As I said in the beginning, we copied the other person. So as a result, our note taking is probably going to be ineffective because we don't really know how to make good notes. Secondly, with this whole TikTok and Instagram phenomena, when it comes to note taking, look at all these GCSE accounts and these learning accounts. What do they focus on when it comes to note taking? And this is just the truth. They focus on looking beautiful. So on their thumbnails, they'll have the word GCSE written in nice writing and their notes are beautiful. But does anybody ever question the quality of their notes? What I'm trying to say, guys, is this will be a disease that affects us as well, where when it comes to our notes, we've become people who are more bothered about having pretty looking notes than actually effective notes. And based upon the data, we are not going to have effective notes because we don't know how to make notes. Then what's the point of having pretty notes? Because that's just an absolute waste of time anyway. So in summary, guys, what does the data tell us? That highlighting, rereading, and making notes are ineffective strategies when it comes to learning and when it comes to revising. Does that mean that we're going to stop doing them? No, we're probably still going to keep on doing them, but it puts them into context. As I said, all three of these should be things that we do at the start of our revision. So even if you're starting your revision today, spend 1 week making your notes, rereading your content, and summarizing and making notes, and highlighting whatever you want to highlight. Get it out of the way, because then you're able to move on to the best strategy for learning. When it comes to learning, guys, when it comes to learning and revising, there is one strategy that, based upon the data, came above all of the rest. And this comes across in lots of different studies. We're using Dunlowski's as our main reference point. But if you look at loads of studies going back, guys, to almost 90 years ago, this strategy is always at the top. And what is the strategy, guys? It's the strategy of active recall. Whether you want to call it testing stuff, whether you want to call it active recall, practicing, it's all the same thing. But it's the idea of testing your knowledge. So whatever you've learned, putting it into practice. Now, before I give my 2 cents on this, let's read what the data has found. The data, guys, has found that on the basis of the evidence described above, we rate practice testing as having high utility. Testing effects have been demonstrated across an impressive range of practice test formats, kinds of material, learner ages, outcome measures, and retention intervals. Practice testing is not particularly time intensive relative to other techniques, and it can be implemented with minimal training. Finally, several studies have provided evidence for the efficacy of practice testing in representative educational contexts. Now, other studies, guys, have shown that practice testing can improve performance by 10 to 15%. Now, I'm fully brought into this idea of retrieval, of testing, of improving the connection with your brain and what you know and how you apply it. This is so important. So important. I'll start by giving you my experience as a teacher. I've learned my content, right? I've learned Macbeth, I've learned poetry, I've learned shit, whatever you want to call it, Jekyll and Hyde. Everything that I've learned. But that knowledge was in a book. It existed in a book. But every time, I always say this, guys, every time I teach Macbeth, every time I teach an Inspector Calls, every time I make these videos, every time I test what I know, every time I make a TikTok video talking about Jekyll and Hyde or Christmas Carol or how to write a paragraph, that constant application of what I know, it makes my knowledge of this subject 10 times better. 10 times better. The best thing I do is teach, because teaching allows me to always apply what I know. And it's that constant application. Guys, if you're learning about Macbeth, if you're learning science, if you're learning history, if you're learning maths, apply your knowledge, actively recall it. Whether this means you're going to talk to a friend about what you've learned, you're going to talk to parents about what you know, you're going to sit and do exam papers after every revision session just to test what you've learned. Always ensure that there's a connection between what you've learned and your brain, where you're not just consuming information, because the data shows that the more we put it into practice, the more we are forced to recall, the sharper we get, the more we can improve our knowledge of this area, and as a result, the better we do in exams. I always say it, guys. So for example, if you're revising Romeo and Juliet and you're revising the character of Romeo, don't just sit and highlight. Don't just sit and reread. Don't just sit and make notes. Put it into practice. Do a question. Do a paragraph. Make a video. Tell a friend. But constantly engage yourself in this field. And this isn't even just for like learning academic subjects. I remember, guys, when I used to go for job interviews, I would make my friends test me on questions. Things that I knew up here, but I would make them test me, and every time I would answer the question, the way I would do it would get better. Because the process of actively recalling, I would get sharper and sharper and sharper, and I would get better at applying it in pressure situations. So guys, the data says it, I've always said it, and schools should scream it from the rooftops, that the most beneficial strategy when it comes to learning, proven by the data, is active recall. This essentially means using what you've learnt in practice and not just storing information in your head. Because your exams will force you to recall the information. And if you haven't recalled it from a long time, then it's going to be somewhere far back in the 10th row of your brain. And by the time you bring it to the front, your exam's going to be over. So guys, in summary, if we look at the data, we learn that just because something is a popular strategy, it doesn't mean it's the most effective. Highlighting, making notes, and rereading are not the best ways to revise. However, we're not going to abandon them, but I would do them at the very beginning. And now going forward, ensure your revision focuses on what the data says and ensure you're putting whatever you learn into practice. All right, guys, it's been Mr. Everything English. I hope I've helped you with your revision. Peace.